Hello, my name is Steve Buckley and I would like to give you an introduction to the latest version of AIM's grant and program management software. I'm going to open by logging into the system as a system administrator to give you a quick overview of some of the tools that we can use to configure your solution and that you'll be able to use on an ongoing basis to maintain grant programs, set up new application forms and manage your processes. On logging into AIMS, the first screen I'm presented with is my inbox, and that is split now into three sections. We have my current tasks, which in this case include some application forms, some other monitoring reports, some payment claims that I may be working on. It's also possible to look at graphs. These can be configured per role, per client, and my historical applications. This inbox is the same landing page that every user, whether they're internal or external, will have access to within AIMS. But what you can see within that list, particularly on your current tasks, is determined by your roles and permissions. There's a granular level of control within the system to decide exactly what you can see and when and how you interact with the system, which supports organizations, both in terms of the information that they share with applicants, grantees, external reviewers, internal staff, and controlling who has access to information and what they can do with that information. So I've logged in as a system administrator. What you'll notice now with this particular view is they also have access to a number of different menu items. And what I want to do here is to give you a quick introduction to the configuration of the system before we then move to log in as different users so that you can get a feel for how the look and feel of that works depending on your role. Going straight to the administration menu, we're going to start by looking at the workflow builder. So again, these are the configurable tools that I can use to create my AIMS processes, and we shall select an example of a workflow. And we can see here that there are a number of different areas that I can assign information to this workflow. Let's look at our graphic process editor. And in this view, we can follow the path through from an applicant who is a two-stage application process where they're also required to get an endorsement. This is interesting in terms of workflow, that we can apply workflow to the application stage so that you can have individuals and organizations collaborate on applications, but also have two-step authorization. For example, if an application from a researcher needs to be endorsed or signed off by a head of department, all of this is completely configurable through workflow. In this case, we're moving through evaluation, decisions, approvals, commitments, and closing grants. Now, this is a relatively straightforward workflow, but you can see that it's easy to be able to assign different stages and different business rules for the transitions between those stages. Now, if I return to my management screen, we look at some transitions, the different stages associated with this, and let's look at one of our evaluation screens. If I click on the forms section, I can see this is a list of online forms within the system, and we can see which of these is configured for a particular stage. If I want to assign new forms to an evaluation stage, for example, I simply click them here. This allows me to reuse forms again and again on different workflows for different programs. Again, one of the other features within Workflow is that I can copy workflows to reuse them as often as I need in terms of coming up with new funding programs that can be based on a template with template documents for assessment, for eligibility checks that can be reused. We can assign roles to Workflow. Which controls, again, the interaction of different users within the system. You decide what those roles are to reflect your business process. We can also assign different panels, different deadlines to workflow processes, all of which are audited and tracked so that we can see exactly what changes have been made at what stage. Let's take a quick look then at smart forms. Together with Workflow, these are the key tools that we use to configure the solution to meet your requirements. Let's look at an application form. And we can see in this view that we're split into different tabs for an application, different sections of my form, applicant and team members, project details, commercialization plan. It's possible to add as many different sections as you need. Let's look at an example of a section, and you'll see how the form builder works on page. Now, this is quite a technical view, but we provide training in this for you to be able to administer your forms on an ongoing basis. In this case, it's easy to add new sections, add new questions, and then use the different tools here to be able to configure the size, type of response, whether it's a text box, whether it has a word count, if it's mandatory, whether it's radio buttons, is it a drop-down menu, is it pre-populated with information elsewhere in the system. There are lots of different ways of configuring different questions within this form. Other quick administration points to focus on. We have the ability to add static data. By static data, we mean classifiers for different types of information that you want to be able to tag projects or applications with. There are lots of other controls under this section where we can look at funds, fund types, project statuses, user groups, regional maintenance, various other configurations that we use. It's worth noting we also have a feature here which is for multi-currency, for working across different countries and different grant making, and its aims is also a multilingual system, so we can add in different languages, and you could switch with some configuration for your users to be able to select the language that they want to be able to operate in. Our template letters feature allows us to create letters, templates, reports, and these essentially work as mail merge documents. So fields that we have added into AIMS as part of our configuration can then be available to add as merge fields to documents. This mail merge functionality can also be used to create formatted reports or meeting papers, again using information that's been entered in the system to be merged into documents that you can then print, email, or produce as meeting papers and meeting packs to circulate to decision makers. One of the other quick areas that we'll look at, and we'll come back to template letters when we look at an actual project from the perspective of a user, but let's just quickly touch on permissions. I mentioned there was a very granular level of permissions and control. In this case, we can see for a general workflow, the different roles within that workflow and the different permissions which they have, which dictate what they can see on screen at different stages, what they're allowed to view and edit. Now, this is quite a granular level of control, and we work with you when we initially set up the system to configure this for you to match your processes. Of course, that can be changed and amended over time at any stage. This granular level of control allows us to introduce lots of management of information, but also segregation of duties. So where you want to introduce controls within workflow, two-step authorization for budget approval, for contact approval, for bank details, for payment release, all of which can be managed with rules and workflow. I'll briefly touch on another area which is important for consideration when people are considering how to move forward with AIMS. In fact, we have a number of different API menus here for data migration, for data loading, or for finance. In which case we look at our financial API files for contacts, commitments, fund commitments. This is how information is transferred to and from financial systems when commitments are made. And these are all configurable files where we get to decide on what the layout is. In this case, I've selected the contact file, and you can see that we can have a number of different fields that we would enable or disable to create a contact file or supplier file to be able to update a financial system. AIMS integrates with most financial systems: Sun Accounts, Great Plains, Oracle Financials, SAP Financials, Aggresso more recently, and I think the concept here in terms of being able to create those flexible files, being able to add in your own unique identifiers, legacy numbers, your own chart of accounts, account codes, cost centers, makes this a very flexible tool for integration. So that was a quick look at some of the key administration tools. There's a lot more here, obviously, and we do provide training in how to use this to manage your system on an ongoing basis. You can choose to create your own workflows, create your own forms. You can work in conjunction with us to be able to do that for you. You could train early within the life cycle of a project to work with us on the configuration and implementation of your system. There are lots of different permutations and ways of working to best support your needs at a given point in time. While I'm logged in as a system administrator, we'll look at some of the other menu items here. We have a contacts menu, which allows me to look for contact records, an application menu. I can create applications, reallocate, reassign relationships. I have a powerful search functionality, searching for applications, a simple search by name, by ID, an advanced application search, which allows me to look for keywords or any classifiers, any date ranges that I want to be able to add to the system. So the advanced application search, while having a lot more fields that you could select from, is also configurable to add in your own organizational custom fields. So if you have particular classifiers that you want to be able to be available as part of search functionality, that is all done through configuration. We can search for payments and claims. We have a meeting module, and we'll look at that when we log into the system as a panel to see where applications can be sent for decision. There's some printing functionality and some standard reporting items. But I'll return now to my inbox and show you a number of key views within the system. The first being a project view, and for the purpose of that exercise, I'll look for an application that's been awarded. This is a typical project view or application view. The default opening is on the Documents tab. We can see on the Documents tab here we have a number of different documents that have been created either as part of the application process or part of an evaluation process done internally, or external reviews which have been added to the system. The different tabs across here that are viewable from a project are configurable again by roles and permissions. As I mentioned at the start, I'm logged at this point in as a system administrator to show you the full tool set, but you may decide, and we'll see this when we look at individual user views, to restrict the number of tabs and the type of information that people can see, that users can see depending on their role. Other key tabs to note here, the Summary tab. Again, this is configurable to store key information about a project. You can add in additional fields here, whether that might be a 50-word summary, an abstract for a research application. Milestones can be added to a project. Financial amounts are visible as well. In this case, we can see we've tracked this application from an applied for amount, a recommendation, through to a decision, and finally a commitment for a full amount. This can all be selected at different stages, and we can have multiple budgets comprising a single grant, and you can add different rules that stipulate what funds can be linked to what programs. There's lots of ways of managing the assignment of funding to be able to track the commitment through the life cycle of the project. So that's a project view. If I return to my inbox, we look at another key view, which is a contact record. Again, this is a series of tabs which are controlled, the access of which is controlled with roles and permissions, as with applications. But the key things to note here, apart from the summary details of the organization, again, this is configurable to add in your own classifiers or other fields that are relevant. We have addresses, bank details, linked parties. This shows me, in the case of the University of Singapore, the different relationships that different individuals have with that organization. An organizational administrator, some investigators, reviewers, research directors, all of who can interact with the organization with different capacities, whether they are internal users or external applicants, reviewers, users working within the organization. The other thing that we want to quickly look at here is the application listing. And this gives us a quick overview of the total commitments, total paid payments, scheduled payments for the organization, and the list of applications and their statuses for this organization. Some awarded, some have variations in progress, some at decision stage, some applications in draft. This is a view that can be made available to host organizations, host institutions externally, to assist them with managing their own suite of applications. I'll return to my inbox again to show you one last view. We looked at the project or application view. We looked at the contact record, but I also want to look at a task. And in this case, we're looking at a different view. This is the application processing screen, and this is the part where we take a task that is a stage within workflow and look at the key activities associated with that task. We can add help texts on screen at any stage. In this case also, you can see here, these are the tabs that are associated with a project, but they're in a smaller view here. They're still accessible. We can still see the document history, and we can move to different tabs here if it's required. But in this case, I have an action to complete, my quarterly report, And as this is an example that we've looked at previously, we can see that it is different stages here for an application form or a progress report as a user, and we can see there are different tabs that we can move between, different types of questions. Ways of setting up milestones, reporting on outcomes, indicators, impact. So the purpose of looking at that was to look at our application processing screen and how we move activities from the to-do section to done, and that allows us to move to the next step within the workflow. So if this had been an evaluation or a reviewer stage and you completed a number of different actions associated with the task, you can then select the next stage within that workflow, which might be go to decision meeting, could be send for authorization. In this case, we're still logged in as a system administrator, but let's log out now and log in as an applicant, and we'll see the different view and the restriction on the menu items that they have access to. Before I log in as an applicant, we want to have a quick look at a number of different views on the applicant-facing side of the system. I can go and select my funding starting point. Do I want to apply as an individual or as an organization? Now this would be the jumping off point from your web portal if you select that you want to apply for a grant, and depending on whether or not you allow applications for individuals, these options can be enabled or disabled so that you're automatically applying as an organization. And then we have the opportunity to present information about different funding calls, all of which is configurable. So you can set the start and close dates for different calls here. But if we, as pre-registration or pre-signing in, I want to be able to look at information about a funding program. I can see key information, contact information, further information, documents can be made available here as well. I can review this and decide, yes, that's the scheme I want to apply for. I'll select the apply for the scheme button. And now I'm prompted to either log in or register as a new user. I want to log in as an existing applicant. And because I selected my form as part of the pre-login, pre-registration page, it will take me directly to the application form for the program I selected. Because I selected I want to apply as an organization, it's presenting me with a list of the organizations that the individual who I have signed in as for demo purposes is linked with. Let's select one of these. So individuals can have multiple relationships with multiple organizations and other individuals as well. It's many-to-many relationship types possible between individuals and organizations and the roles that those individuals have. So an applicant can be in one capacity, a researcher in another. In this case, we're looking at the research proposal form, and this is quite a complex form with a number of different stages. We'll pick an example. And open that section of the form. Again, you can see here we're looking at a number of different tabs, some of which have been marked as complete already. And we can enter in some values. Save that draft, return to that application at any stage, move through different sections. In this case, I'm being asked for to supply a referee. And I also mentioned earlier that we can build a workflow around an application process with this form in particular. We have a stage here called endorsement, so that I can work through those different sections as an applicant, but then I have to send my application for endorsement to a financial director within the organization for them to actually submit the application form itself. Now let's exit this form. I can return to that at any stage. It shows me here the different mandatory fields that I did not complete as part of that form. That validation helps with the overall improvement of quality with forms that are submitted. You can set the validation, you can put in business rules, you can decide that income must total with expenditure, you can decide that certain fields have to be mandatory, the quality of information that's put in certain fields, whether it's numerical, text fields, that they can only select from particular drop-down menus, all of which is configurable through the system, but it greatly improves the quality of the information and the completeness of application forms. Where an error is highlighted or some mandatory information is missing, that link there within the form takes the applicant directly back to that section for them to be able to complete it correctly. I want to return now to my inbox view from an applicant perspective. Now you'll notice here, of course, they don't have the administration menu items that the internal system administrator had, but we have a number of key fields. We can look at funding, so I can go back and apply to another program. I can choose the language that I wanted to apply for. In this case, I've gone back to my inbox. This inbox is quite similar to the one that you will have seen for the internal system administrator, but in this case, on my current tasks and historical applications. Graphs can be enabled here as well if you choose. Interestingly, on the past application section, we have a number of different things we can do here. These are for grants that have been awarded. I could choose to look at an application that has been successful. And we can see here that the tabs are restricted to what I can access as an external user. I can see the summary tab, and within that you can control what fields on that summary tab are visible. Again, with the documents tab, you can say which documents are visible to external users. You don't have to show internal assessment forms or any kind of ad hoc commentary that's been added to the life cycle of the project. We can look at milestones, project costs, claims. There are a number of different views there. The other thing I want to look at from my inbox is my profile, where I want to be able to edit my details or some of the information that I have permission to edit as part of my registration with different organizational applicants. I will select my own contact record, and here's where I would maintain my details, my areas of interest. This is configurable. You can add in a number of different fields here if you wanted to support, for example, external reviewers and their specialisms, and they can maintain their own details. There's a number of different fields here. Let's go back to my inbox. This is also the place that I will return to. So when I'm applying for applications to start with, but we can also see here that I can have various tasks assigned to me. And in this case, I have a variation either that I have requested or that has been sent to me as a task. And it's in my task list. I would receive notification from the system to say something had been assigned to me, a milestone report that was scheduled for me to be able to log in as a grantee and complete. And we can see different type of reasons that you might select for somebody selecting to request a variation, and This also allows us to show how forms are data driven. So in this instance, I've ticked the extension of project duration, so I'm prompted to enter a new project end date and then supply text or upload supporting documentation to support that process. If I submitted a variation form, then depending on how you've configured your workflow, that form may be sent to a grants administrator or manager for them to be able to approve the request or review it and send it forward for a decision. Okay, that's a view as an applicant. I'm going to log out now, and I'll log back in as an organizational user, an internal user, in this case a grants administrator or grants manager, and we can see that they have more menu items internally, still with the inbox, but now they have the internal administration menu. In this case, they have access to administer funds, but they don't have access to the system administration menu, which allows the user to configure the system, create forms, amend workflows, etc. But they still have access to a wide range of different functions given this role: applications, search, meeting management. A typical activity that might take place here, we have the allocation of external reviewers. Now, this is a simple mechanism. We are in the process of introducing a new relationship management module, which will allow the multiple assignment of reviewers and applications and the management of those. But in this case, we just want to be able to link reviewers to an application. We can see a number of different contacts have been added. I might select to add multiple reviewers by searching for a contact name and a role. So we have a number of different reviewers and different roles that have already been assigned to this project. If reviewers have been linked, you can start a review process. We'll come to see what the reviewer sees in a moment. I just want to return to my inbox and give an example of some other tasks. Again, showing the application processing screen. And in this case, we have an eligibility check that has been marked as already complete. I want to redo that activity. I'll open that form. And this is a single page form with a series of radio buttons. A checklist. If I save that draft and continue, let's say I've completed my eligibility check. We can see that's moved from an activity from to do into the done section, and I can choose what the next steps in my workflow are. So at this point I might have a number of different actions here. I might do a contact check, a due diligence check, an eligibility check, review documentation that's been attached, and then decide whether or not to move on to the next stage, where I might assign an external reviewer, assign a budget, send my project forward to a meeting. Or if I've configured it within the workflow, I might decide to send it back to an applicant and request more information, or in the application process here as ineligible. All of this is configurable within the solution, and this, I hope, is giving you a flavor for the variation that you can configure. Let's return to our inbox again. And we'll look at another role. In this case, well, this is another task, I should have said, for a post-award monitoring. We might also request a variation, but in this case we want to look at an internal status report. And we have examples of responses which have already been created, but I want to create a new one. It's prompting me for a form. Now this is a basic form which allows me to do my internal monitoring update, date of report, author, update on project, any issues, attaching documentation. So this is a very straightforward basic internal status report that you could configure any number of different reports, any number of different forms to be started on an ad hoc basis or in line with milestones or key reporting dates. One of the other views that we mentioned earlier when we looked at the administration menu is my grant administrator or grant manager. In this case, has the role to manage funds. Let's look at funds maintenance. So this is another critical key view within the system. This is where I set up funds or budgets that I can then select as part of my application processing and send for decision. In this case, we have a list of funds set up here, and we can see the current amount, the unallocated amount, committed amounts, a breakdown which shows movement in and out of these funds, whether or not they have been authorized. So funds can be requested by a user internally and then need to go through an authorization process, which could be signed off by internally by a financial director before they can be used for aligning with projects and funds. Let's see some of the details we can see on here. Right. If I select a fund to view, we see the details, schemes become visible. And in this case, we can show the source, but you can also apply multiple sources, whether or not this is a restricted fund, and add in, this screen is configurable again to add in different coding or budget segments that you would use to define your fund. It may be the year, the source, the account to cost code, all of which would contribute towards a budget string that will inform where you are posting in your financial ledgers. We can also dictate what schemes can work with what funds. In this case, this particular fund, the Academies Fund, can only work with the climate change and the research schemes. We can look at transfers, whether or not we want to move money between different funds, and all of the transactions, all of the amendments are audited on the system. We can see you have a number of different tables here which build up an audit record of all activity. So I'll return to my inbox again, and I want to log out as my grant administrator or grant manager and log back in as an external reviewer. Again, to show you a different perspective, a different level of access, a different view of the system, separate from that of an internal user, but also different to an applicant. Now, in this case, again, we're coming back to something that is similar to the applicant view. We have our basic menu items across the top, no administration menus. We have our inbox. Again, as a reviewer, I can maintain my own details. I can be linked to several different organizations in different capacities. I want to look at my current tasks that have been assigned to me. When I've been assigned a review to perform, for example, I would receive an email notification with a link prompting me to log into the system, all of which is depending on how you configure your solution. One other thing to note here as well, obviously as a reviewer, I could be an applicant in my own right. I can have a number of different roles here within the same system, but I want to have a look at a typical review process. In this case, it's taking me to an application processing screen, which allows me to see, again, our project menu here with different tabs. But in this case, it's restricted just to look at the summary, documents, milestones. And on the summary, I can see some internal reporting, some attachments, some examples of different documents which have been attached over the life cycle of the project to date. We have an evaluation form. Let's reopen that so we can look and see that form. This is the task I've been assigned and the activity to complete. It's a basic evaluation form as part of my review. I can put in scores, amend those scores, get a total. Again, if we looked at adding in dates for potentially for interviews or project presentations, if such a thing is required, this is just an example of that functionality within SmartForms where it can be data driven and you're just presenting the information that you need to be able to see at any given time. Let's save draft and continue. Yes, I want to submit my form. Now I could choose to submit that review, withdraw it, or whatever you decide within your workflow what the next steps are. Reviews can also obviously be done, they are child workflows, they can be done, started by the grants administrator, and several can be done in parallel. I'll log out as a reviewer. I'll log back in now as our grant administrator. Show a couple of final functions for this demo, one of which is to look at our meeting module. So I'll search for an existing meeting. That I happen to know the ID for. I'll view this record. And we can see some meeting details. So you can set up a meeting as a one-off meeting, or you can set up a regular recurring event and then assign applications to that meeting either manually or as part of a scheduled business rule. We can look at the scope of the meeting. In this case, there is an approval limit and a list of the programs that can be assigned, that applications can be assigned to this meeting. We can add in attendees. This can be linked with their declarations of interest. So if any of the attendees or decision makers have declared an interest in an organization or an application that's been submitted to this meeting, for example, then that could be flagged within the meeting papers. We can look at a list of applications that have been assigned. In this case, we just have 2. We could record decisions on these meetings, on these applications. We can set them to approved, rejected, or and any other outcome that you need to be able to select at this stage. If this was part of a series of decision meetings, for example, the outcome may simply be a recommendation, a panel recommendation, or another type of request, send back and amend. You can also look at the decision log. There's nothing recorded here at the moment because those decisions are still waiting to be recorded, but that would be populated by the decisions once they've been made. You can create meeting papers. Let's look at a draft version, and in this case it will open within Word. The meeting papers, again, these are formatted Word documents that can be created using the merge field functionality that I mentioned when discussing template letters. And in this case, it's produced a project summary of the 2 records within this meeting. all of these are configurable fields that can be added as mail merge to formatted documents, and then you can attach correspondence to that meeting. So the draft meeting papers that were created are automatically attached here for record, but you could also add comments or upload files if, for example, you need a signed record of minutes attached to a meeting for audit purposes. This will be the place to keep all of your documentation within the system. So one of the other things then that we want to look at is an application search to show some final tasks around monitoring and closure of an application and payment management. I'm going to look for the ID of a project that I know has been awarded. We can see its status here. I want to view that project. By default, it's taken me to the Summary tab. Again, because I've logged in as my grants administrator or grants manager, I have a number of different tabs here, and you may decide you want to restrict access to some of these. But let's look at conditions. And we can see in summary the different milestones or conditions that have been attached to this project. And some of these relate to release of payment, for example. And we can see there's a list here of different conditions, some of which are still open. Some have been waived, some have been met. Let's look at one of our other tabs. We can look at financial amounts. The different stages: applied, recommended, decided, and committed. So that's the total commitment on this project. Now let's look at our project costs. The project costs can be entered as part of an application and can be tracked then through to the monitoring of an award and be updated over time. In this case, we have the summary of the project costs for this application, and we can see that the applied for amount was split into other expenses, manpower, capital, with periods and statuses. As part of the application process, you can configure project costs to have different headings that would correspond to your own income and expenditure categorization. It is possible to use the system then to process claims. So an applicant might decide, rather than having a payment in retrospect on a scheduled basis on receipt of reports, or scheduled payments in advance based on key dates within the project lifecycle, you might decide that you want to use the claims module so that applicants or grantees can submit claims for funding. For example, in this case, an applicant submitted a claim, and we can see the type of information which they're required to provide. They could have attached documentation to support an invoice for capital purchase, for example. Claim is one type of payment. Let's look at another, scheduled payment. And in this case, we have a number of different payments that have been set up on our project, and we can add and edit these if we have the correct permission. Obviously, that can be restricted to particular roles. And here we have partial payments and final payments. And within this, we can see these two payments have been paid. We also have a partial payment and a final payment outstanding. This one has a green tick next to it that tells me that the conditions associated with this payment have been met. For my created payment here, I have a red X. Let's view that. That should show me that there are outstanding conditions on this payment. If I view those conditions, we can see that there's a requirement for a KPI report to be submitted. If that workflow hasn't been started, I could start that workflow. It'll put the task into the task list, the inbox of my grant recipient, prompting them to submit their KPI report. Now that workflow can be started manually, or it can be started in response to a schedule automatically, and they will receive notification to say that the KPI report is required. That can then be entered online. So let's move back to our payments. When conditions have been met, you would then have the facility to be able to amend the payment, or recommend it for release, or delete the payment if you had the permission to do so. Going back to our summary tab, one of the other things that I wanted to look at here, we can see across here we have the top menu, and the last activity associated with this grant, the last task, is to close the grant. Let's click on that task. At any point, this top bar allows me to look at different parts of my application. It tells me the application that I'm looking at, the organization that the application is associated with, the program, title, and the task that is the current stage of the application process. In this case, we wanted to close our grant. Now, you could decide here that you could have a number of different activities, some of which might be reconciliation, a fall-in process, a recovery process, all of which you would decide within your own configuration and your own workflow. You could also build in validation rules to say that, if I move to the payments tab, that closure can't be completed while there's still an outstanding balance associated with the project. So again, these are the business rules that you will be able to configure yourself through the system and with our help. So that's an overview of key areas of the system. We've moved from system administration and some of the key building blocks, our workflow, our smart forms, the ability to set up static data to configure the system to be able to easily add drop-down menus and other information, the fact that it's a multilingual, multi-currency system, and that we can create template letters, formatted reports, different types of email, offer letters, contracts. We then went in to log in as an applicant to show what an applicant view would look like. We looked at the different views that different users would see an applicant, a grant administrator or grant manager internally with the administration menus, an external reviewer, and how their access can be restricted so that they just see the task that's been assigned to them and the documentation they need to complete that task. One other final area then before we sign out, we looked at post-award monitoring, examples of different forms. There's lots of ways to configure these and lots of different examples. And if we come to look at a more configured demo, we'll be able to provide you with examples that are a better match for your own requirements. But let's do a last quick look at some of the reporting items. There are several different ways of managing reports from AIMS. We can integrate with a BI tool of your choice. We provide you with a universe, a reporting universe within AIMS, where we take the several hundred different database fields, many of which you can add yourself as part of your configuration. And we consolidate those into a number of different views, which allow you a much more constructed universe for you to be able to report on information. And that can be linked to a BI tool that you can then use for drag and drop functionality. It's the same connection that works with Excel if you wanted to use Excel as your reporting tool and pre-populate tables with that can just be refreshed every time you open your Excel's worksheet. This is particularly useful, I think, for, in my experience for working with financial teams, if they want to look at management account reporting for grant management, for example, on a regular basis and just have their templates refreshed by linking them to the AIM system. So a BI tool or an Excel tool can link very easily to look at those universes, and we can write reports there. We also have an operational platform, an operational reporting platform, which allows you to create your own SQL reports, and we can run flat file reports in that way. This report menu here is our standard out of the box reporting, and this, let's look at status analysis, allows me a number of different operational style reports to support different ways of tracking applications through different stages. So in this case, we have several statuses, different schemes, different regions. I've run a didn't filter by report in any way, but let's look at some examples here. So if I wanted to look at my youth scheme in Singapore for approved applications, I have 5 at that stage now. I can drill down into those 5 applications and I can look at those in more detail. This is the organization and their application history. So there are a number of different ways of drilling down into information to get to the bottom level. Let's look at another example report. Application listing. I'll run this report without selecting any filters. And again, we can see a count of applications by scheme. We have 5 applications at draft stage. Shows me my applicant. As yet, they haven't completed project titles or applied for amounts. So these are applications that are still at draft and have yet to be submitted. So there's a number of different ways of tracking applications through the entire process. Okay, that's a quick overview of AIMS. I hope that this has been useful, and please get in touch if there are any other areas you would like to explore in more detail. Thank you.